Another example though was I worked on Everybody Loves Raymond, and it was I don't know if you've seen Exporting Raymond that Phil Rosenthal did. It's a great movie. He was the creator of Raymond, and they took they did a version of it in the native language of many countries, and it found success in Russia. It was a huge hit. It was actually, I think, a Guinness World Record holder in Russia for a foreign language import, and it just went on and on. Now, but that's a family show. So anyway, the short answer is I don't know. If I knew for sure, I'd create that hit and be much more wealthy, be a really wealthy guy if I could figure it out. I'm trying to figure it out because I think if you tell universal stories, there should be universal appeal. But comedy does change. You know, comedy does change from generation to generation. You look at the meme humor that my daughter likes, and it seems, I don't understand it. She's tried to explain it, but I don't totally get the meme humor.
Well, let's talk about that process a little bit, and we'll take a peek inside the writer's room and inside your writer's brain as well, Aaron. So talk to us a little bit about when you're coming up with concepts. We're going to delve into woof.com. We'll also talk about some other shows. And by the way, guys, if you have questions for Aaron about The Office, please chat them into the chat box and we'll get some of them answered. But Aaron, talk to us about the writing process, and let's touch on woof.com.
Okay, so the writing process, let's specifically for The Office, because there are certain like lineages of culture for how a show is created. There is no hard and fast rule. So, but there's kind of the Saturday Night Live lineage, and then there's kind of the Gary Marshall Happy Days lineage for talking for sitcoms specifically. So The Office is more of an SNL, also Harvard Lampoon influence. And it's also single camera, which means there isn't a laugh track and there isn't an audience. And on The Office, we had a fairly large writing staff, like 12 to 15 people. And Greg Daniels, who adapted the British version for the United States, really liked things to be externalized. And I like this method where he would want us to write things on 3x5 cards and put those on the wall. And what it did is it sort of depersonalized a lot of the ideas so that your idea would end up on the wall. And if it's a potentially good idea, there was one column for maybe ideas and definite ideas, and we're working on these ideas, and you would hope that your cards would march down the path. But we would pitch so many different ideas that there'd be similar versions of the same idea. And so it became less about your personal authorship and more about this externalized concept of the story or the event. And at one time, Jen Salata, who was co-running the show when I was there, we were looking at a board for a specific episode. We were breaking it down. And I remember her looking at the board and going, "Come on, story, show yourself." And I really like the idea that the story was a thing, an objective external thing that you can find. I don't know if that's really true, but it's a great way to think about it. And it also helps to get the idea out of your head and onto a piece of paper. So somewhere all those 3x5 cards are probably still exist. And I still do that now. My kitchen's full of these random 3x5 cards with weird things written on them, just floating around the house. My daughter has Instagrammed some of them to my to my chagrin, because it looks like a madman's ideas with some of them. So do you remember any notable ones?
You left one out that all it said was, "You survived this life."
True. And good advice for all of us.
That might have been an affirmation.
Well, so let's talk about woof.com. So back in 2010, there was an episode that you wrote called woof.com, and it felt almost like a forerunner. So BJ Novak, who helped, also had a hand in producing, creating the show, writing it at least. His character came up with an idea for a social media concept that would alert you when a message was coming in on every single communication channel you have. Someone would want to get in touch with you, and it would come through a email, it would come through a text, it would come through a fax machine, a printer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this character is trying to get that idea off the ground as a startup. And so our guy, Michael Scott, is one of the main investors of this idea. And the show centers on the character's trying to de-invest from that idea, while Michael is trying to raise it up through friendship and through an investor stake. So you see the heart of Michael Scott, you see the frustration that people have with him, and you eventually see him, spoiler alert, as someone who does the right thing overall. And that's a recurring theme in the show. And I'm curious, Aaron, that through line of Michael being a good guy, which is very different from the UK version, how much did that enter into your writing process?
We wanted to have him be only minimally good. You wanted to have him be only as good as necessary to keep you there. And often we would have 3 acts. The normal structure was a 3-act structure. Often we would break what would be considered normal good storytelling, because that was Michael's character, is that he would learn the thing most characters would have learned at the end of the show, at the beginning of the 2nd act, and then he would have a 3rd act of still not learning that thing. Several of my episodes were that way. It's like that by all normal writing rules, we should have moved on by now. But it's so fun to watch Michael not get it, or how barely he gets it. Wolf.com, in terms of the development of Michael's character, is a moment where he's learning. He's invested in Ryan as who he wants to be friends with him, and you can tell the only reason he's investing is they're going to go skiing, and he wants to be buddies with him. And other characters are explaining to him, Ryan is not a good guy, he's not your friend, he's just using you. And you see him slowly coming to terms with that. So it's about his investment. Has he invested wisely? And so the short answer is we want him to be barely good enough that we don't hate him. And the other thing about Michael that's great is he, as a comedic character, works because he has one single wrong idea that he'll never fix. And so every episode is him coming up against this wrong idea, which is, in his mind, that his employees should be his friends. And anyone who's been a boss knows that you want your employees to be happy, and you don't want to be a jerk. But friendship is not. It can happen, but that shouldn't be the primary objective. So that's his tragic flaws, that he thinks he's. Whereas I think the Office version, the British version would be more like he thinks he's a star. Michael Scott does too, of course, but I think ultimately we have him pursuing friendship and affection in the wrong place, as opposed to his primary goal being fame.
I think one of the things that's also interesting about the show and about this episode is that, it's like a pseudo reality show in certain ways, right? It's obviously scripted, it's obviously not real, but in the same, there's no laugh track, there are awkward silences built in to the show. And so we can identify with a lot of the characters, and yet it's an office. In the very first scene of Wolf.com, there's sort of a hullabaloo that exists around the office, and before we go into the credits, Jim stares into the camera and just shakes his head like, what am I doing here? And I feel like that's something that all of us can sort of identify with, and yet he stays. He doesn't leave. He stays in that job for way too long. And that's probably something that a lot of us can identify with as well. So I'm curious, Aaron, in your own personal life, were you able to tap any of that sort of professional frustration or professional melees to pour into the show?
Definitely. I had a lot of bad bosses, like all of us. And one of the worst bosses I ever had was actually at public radio, where you would think, people would have good motives, but I brought stories about that boss into my interview for the job. The first writing gig I ever got, I got it because of work history. It was for this show called George and Leo in '96. It was Bob Newhart and Judd Hirsch. And this was my first shot, maybe my only shot. And luckily, I had done the work that's in my bio as a circus clown. And I started talking to them about the time I was attacked by a chimpanzee in the circus. And they ended up hiring me, I think not because the story was so great, as much as they just wanted to be able to say, we hired a clown. They wanted to tell the other showrunners that they hired a clown. So that was the my lucky break. There was the clowning experience. So that so you're saying what are the other examples of? Yeah, it's hard for me to talk too much about real people who are bad bosses though. But yes, I had a lot to draw on.
Yeah, we've all probably
In
had our own crappy
showbiz,
experience.
yeah, and Greg Daniels, who the creator of the American Office, he wanted the writers to kind of live in a Scranton-like environment, and so we were in offices. We shot the offices you saw were actually our offices, and we were in a part of Van Nuys. Jeremy, you're actually. Did you say you grew up in this
Yeah,
part of town?
yeah, I grew up in the East
Yeah,
Valley. Yep.
yeah. So we're in Panorama City, next to a impound lot for cars, and it was not glamorous Hollywood at all, and so some of the sort of dynamics in the writers' room were become manifest in the show. Um, so it was long hours. We'd work at least 12 hours a day, and a lot of careers. People could feel that this was a springboard for their career. So there was a lot of high stakes, and so it's very exciting, but also exhausting. It's exhausting.
I wonder if you guys felt that at the time, Aaron. I mean, yes, I'm almost every main character on the show, and certainly the writers, producers, etc., went on to their own thing, and in some respects, their own starring thing. Mindy Kaling went on to be a very successful author, actor, writer in her own right. BJ Novak, the same thing. And you have this
Michael Schur.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious. I mean, you're saying that there was some pressure for you at the time to try and maybe see to their futures. But to what extent did you feel like The Office was taking off, and that people in the office or people behind the scenes in the office were going to go on and do something that was perhaps larger than The Office in certain respects?
Well, by the time I showed up, season 5, the party was going. People knew it was a hit. Even though NBC at the time was claiming that the show was losing money, they claimed they were losing $200,000 an episode, which wasn't true then. It's definitely not true now that it's gone on to have such a great life on Netflix. But that was part of the Hollywood accounting, that they wanted to claim it was a losing proposition. But we definitely knew it was. By then, we knew it was a big deal. But even then, if you had asked me, I would have said, "Oh, I bet you in the long run, Every Bit as Raymond, the other big hit I worked on, would be the one with the legs that would go, because it's about family, and I thought it'd be more universal." And it hasn't quite worked out that way. Raymond's doing fine. It's on Peacock now, but like I said, it went off to do well in Russia and in the Russian version, but not like The Office. So I maybe I was the one who didn't fully understand. Although I bailed on Old Christine, which was a wonderful show. It was Julia Louis-Dreyfus on CBS, and it was just a great show. And the hours were so good, and it was a pleasure to work for her. But I got a chance to go to The Office, so I did know that was probably a better career move. But it was a tough decision.
We're going to get to some of these questions, and if you do have a question, please chat us. Aaron, it's hard to, I think, you look at the shows that you have written, look at the programs you've worked on, and they're all your babies. And it's hard to pick a favorite, right? But is there one that stands out in your mind as, man, I am proud of that thing?
Series or episodes?
Either.
I mean, well, I did pick wolf.com. I'm very proud of that one. And, I'm very neurotic Jew, and people used to make fun of me on pretty much every show I've been on where I haven't been the showrunner. I assume I'm fired. Every joke I pitch, I know this is the last joke, and they're going to realize I'm an imposter. And so I've been lucky because I've only been on good shows, and you often get rewritten. You hand in your draft, and it's often run through the mill, and there's no good outcome, because if they make it worse, that's terrible. But that's never happened to me. They've only made it better. I've never had the experience that it wasn't greatly improved by the rewrite process, which also isn't great, because you would like to believe that your version was of value. So wolf.com, I handed it in, and it went through a pretty big rewrite, and I was feeling insecure about that. And when it came time to submit your drafts for the Writers Guild Award, I was like, oh, whatever. I'm going to submit my draft, not the rewrite. So I submitted my draft, and it ended up being nominated for Writers Guild Award, which was to this day like very affirming. And I even called them back and was like, I want to make sure, which draft did you get? Did you get the one, and so it was indeed mine. It didn't win. I can't remember who did win, but that was enough for me. That was enough affirmation. It's funny because you were at the beginning, you were talking about, you said something very flattering about how, me and my, how good I am as a writer. The LA Times once wrote about me in association with a project I was working on, and they described me as not quite A-list writer Aaron Shure. And I love that description because that is how I feel. And I'm also not quite a lot of things. I'm not quite a model. I won the beauty pageant in high school, but that was only because I was funny. I'm not quite a genius. I'm not quite a lot of things. And I would never call myself A-list. And I'm very happy that I've had the career I've had. But you look at like Michael Schur. I mean, that's an A-list writer, Michael Schur. My middle name is Michael. So I'm Aaron Michael Schur, and he's Michael Schur. So that's my association with him, is we have similar names.
Well,
but he's amazing.
This is a perfect segue into talking about neuroses and Jews in comedy. And Lisa, you asked about this, and I was going to ask about this as well. Talk to us, Aaron, about why Jews are so good at writing comedy, and why through history we've seen a focus on comedic television shows from people who are Jewish, and movies as well.
Boy, I don't really know. Neil Gabler is a smart guy who wrote a book called Empire of Their Own, where he discusses how and why Jews became such a big part of Hollywood. And I think what he rounds it down to is partly is it was considered work that was beneath everybody else. But as to why comedy, sometimes it's the only lever you have to pull, right? Sometimes the only thing you can grab a hold of is a joke or a sense of humor or a sense of irony. If everything else is so terrible, sometimes that's all you got, is like, well, all these bad things are happening to me, but I can come up with you're stabbing me, but I can show you how to twist the knife, sort of attitude. So there may be something about the position Jews have been in. They've been a very unique position of, the wandering. The diaspora gives you an outside look into other worlds. If you're outside, you can sometimes see through a window what people who are inside can't see. So there's a outsider's perspective can lead to comedy as well. But I think anybody can access comedy. I don't think it's, I think it's a universal thing. You know what I learned recently, the difference between a primate laugh and a human laugh is the primates laugh, they vocalize on the inhale as well as the exhale. So that's a primate laugh, or a monkey laugh. And what's interesting for me is like, that's how universal laughter is. Like, everybody laughs. What they laugh at, as we're saying, like whether or not a comedic idea comedic show can be exported to another culture is questionable, but we all laugh, and we all laugh. Somehow we all know we only laugh on the exhale. Some of us, I have heard people laugh when they're really laughing hard, both exhale and inhale. But there's something universal about the laughing. But it may not always be, there's this idea that comedy is a way to speak truth to power, and it's a way to find power when you've been disempowered. But I also think it can be oppressive as well. Freud had the theory that comedy is masks aggression. We don't have to listen to Freud anymore if we don't want to, but I do think some jokes for sure are that, and I do think jokes can be a way of transmitting racial stereotypes. They can be the beginning of ostracizing or disempowering people as well. So I don't know. I'm a practitioner more than a theoretician on this one. So I think sometimes you do the job that they'll let you do, and they let us be comedians.
Well, Shakespeare said, many a true word is spoken in jest. And
yes.
I think that's a way of accessing some of our darkest moments, and in a subconscious way. But let me get to some of these questions, because there are some really good questions in here. And if you guys do have a question, please do ask. We have a few moments left. So a couple of process questions, Aaron. Lisa Singer had some interesting questions about how the directors and actors decide where they're going to stand and move scenes. Is it different in the office because it has an improv feel? How much of it is improvisational? Talk to us a little bit about the process for that.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the directors and the camera operators on The Office, most all of them came from Survivor. So they weren't comedian, they weren't used to comedy to start with. They were used to reality. And so they were very intuitive about how the camera would move and how to find the moment. But of course, it became, after rehearsal, it would be the movement of the camera would be more or less understood. I have to get the reaction. I'm going to pan over there to get the reaction. And the director would, with the actors, come up with the blocking. I got to be a waiter in one episode. And it's sort of a fun story because it was an episode Mindy Kaling wrote. And like I said, we were stuck in Panorama City, not having the Hollywood existence, but this was kind of like A Star is Born for me, where I was in the writer's room suffering the way I do. And Mindy said, "Hey, Aaron, come here for a minute, read this." And she opened a door and there was Steve Carell, and I had to read my waiter line to Steve Carell. I did a horrible job. They cast me anyway. I'm not sure why. They sent me to hair and makeup, and they spent a lot of time trimming my beard. So it's possible Michael Scott just wanted my beard trimmed. And Steve Carell wanted my beard trimmed, so that it was all a ruse just to trim my beard. But then when I was on the set, I was determined not to be that guy with two lines who wants too much attention and ruins the scene, because Lord knows I've had that happen to me. So I did my own blocking, and I did it horribly. I made a terrible decision, but I didn't want to interrupt the director and say, could I come from the left instead of the right? So I was not going to do that. So as a result, I was way out of the room and I couldn't hear anything. And I had to guess when I had to enter and when I had to land at the table in order to be the annoyed waiter who doesn't want to bring the bowl of pickles to Michael Scott and Aaron. And luckily, I was able to land it every time. But what was happening in the other room that I was in, there were no cameras in that room. It was the kitchen of the restaurant. And it looked like the wait staff and the cooks were all there cooking for when the restaurant opened. And then I noticed on like the third take that the guy who I was nodding at before I'd walk out there and pray to God I'd hit the table at the right moment was stirring an empty bowl. And then I looked and everyone was cooking, fake cooking. And I was like, there was a moment of like, is everybody crazy? And then I realized they were all extras. They wanted to get paid, and the second AD wanted them to get paid. So they had them working even though there was no camera anywhere near. And they were all just going through the motions in hopes that they would be on camera. So it's a surreal moment.
It's a great episode. It's called Secretary's Day. And the scene that Aaron is in is when Michael Scott is having a very awkward conversation with someone else from the office, and he's trying to be a good boss and also a terrible boss at the same time. And so it occupies this good bad place that the show is always in. And Aaron steals the scene by asking about pickles.
Oh, I don't think I'm not quite an actor. I'm not quite an A-list and not quite an actor.
So let me ask.
So yeah, the blocking is a big deal, and we really did think about the blocking a lot. And the cameras, we would sort of go with the gut of the camera operators, and then stick with the moves that they made. And we did a lot of like, it's an interesting comparison is to compare the talk you were talking about, like Jim looking at the camera and how that was a hallmark of The Office. We also used to, because it's a documentary, we were very vigilant about justifying where the cameras were. Like, why would Jim still be wearing his mic when he proposed to Pam, for instance? Wouldn't he want that to be private? So we had to really work hard at figuring out when and how. We decided there were two cameras. Sometimes we imagined there was a third camera that could have been down in the parking lot in order to catch the exit or whatever. Then Modern Family came along. They stole that genre. They didn't steal it, but they used that genre, and they didn't care about why people were talking to the camera. They didn't care how many cameras they were. The camera would catch totally private, and nobody cared. People loved that series. It's a great show. And so it's interesting that we put all that effort into that, and maybe it wasn't necessary. Maybe it did add to the value. But then you look at Fleabag. I know people have seen Fleabag. It's a wonderful show. And she looks at camera. It's not a documentary. I mean, there's a lot of speculation about exactly who we are when we watch her character. I don't know, people wave if you've seen it. But it's such a great show, and she creates Jim will look at us with sort of like, I know who, Jim didn't know who we are when he looked at us, but he just knew, like, you know, you guys see how crazy this world is. She would look at us and connect with us as an audience, which I thought was it's a great new take on what's happening at that moment.
Thank you. A question from Esther. Aaron, is there a show that got away? I mean, you talked about your white elephant, but a question is there a show that you wish you'd been able to write on but didn't get drafted for?
A lot of shows. I really like Pam Aglon's show. I'm blanking on the name of it. It's on right now. Sylvia, do you know what that show is? Can you Google it for me? Pam Aglon's show.
Better Things.
Better Things. Yes. Sorry, I love
Esther.
that show. They get away with great. You know, they've taken narrative structure and they do things that you could only do on a streamer. You couldn't do most of the time I've been writing, and I just love how authentic it is. I worked on Lucky Louie, which was Louis C.K.'s show on HBO. Louis also created this show with Pam, but I feel like Pam took what Louis was trying to do with Lucky Louie and infused it with a certain just character and life, and it's about a home. Lucky Louie was sort of a multicam, and it felt stark. Louis C.K. made several very strong choices on it. We lit it like it was porn. We dressed the set like it was a tenement, and it was very stark and not fun. And Pam's show has a lot of darkness to it, but also you see it's a family, you see it's a home, you see her sense of food, you see her sense of art. So anyway, I love that show. That'd be one I would like to hopefully work on before it's had its full run.
All right.
Even any other shows. Star Trek. I would have loved to write for Star Trek. Any one of the Star Trek shows.
A question here from Eitan. Did BJ Novak give you insight on what to write about in this episode? Which, Eitan, I think you mean Wolf.com?
Yeah, BJ. I mean, BJ was a writer too. He wrote episodes as well, and you know, he's written books, great books. He has a wonderful children's book called The Book with No Pictures. Just a killer book to read to your kids. So yeah, he would. What's interesting is he went on to create a app that's not that unlike Wolf.com. It was called List.com, and it was a bunch of lists, and doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, but BJ was he's a great writer. Would help write everything.
Great. Interesting question here from Amy. In the writing process, Aaron, you've gotten to know the characters very well. They become sort of part of you. I'm sure they talked to you in a lot of different ways. So was there ever a disagreement in the writer's room as to, you know, what Jim would say or what Pam would say, or no, that's not their personality, this is their personality? Talk to us a little bit about if there are any sort of conversations or disagreements about that.
Constantly. We would really, there would be arguments in the room. I remember one of my claims to fame on The Office was Kevin's famous chili. I ended up writing a lot of the cold opens, and I remember when I pitched Kevin's famous chili, everyone rightfully said, well, that's really kind of low humor. You know, the big guy spills his chili, you know, that's the joke, you know? And I was like, yes, I know, but it might be funny. And it ended up, people really love it now. I got a birthday card that was a knockoff of that scene. It said, hope your birthday is as great as Kevin's famous chili. And it shows him in a pile of chili. So that was one where I was right. I got to remember one where I was wrong. It's going to be hard. You know, on set sometimes too, you would have to interact with the actors, and the actors would know their character better than anybody else, of course. And so there would be times when the actors would say, I remember I had no idea, but there was a moment, I'm blanking on exactly what it was, but we needed Jim to wear his coat. And John Krasinski was like, Jim he only puts his jacket on the back of his chair. He never wears it. And it was a moment of like, okay, but can we can we break this for a minute? Can we like just have him? Maybe today he was a little cold, he's a little anemic today, Jim. Maybe so. And I remember he ended up wearing the jacket. He's like, okay, I'll give you this. Jim wears a jacket.
Did you guys hear?
Similarly on Raymond, what's that?
Did you guys hear from people afterwards saying that's ridiculous? Jim would never wear a jacket.
That one never came back to us. I did get I wrote 2 weeks, and in it, Michael Scott gets Pam to leave Dunder Mifflin and go to start the Michael Scott Paper Company with him, and we got a lot of feedback. It's funny. Here's something that's changed in the course of my career. On Raymond, the internet was barely a thing, and it was like, there's nothing but crazies on that. Don't even listen to them. And then on The Office, we used to do the equivalent of a live tweeting our episodes. It wasn't on Twitter, but it was a similar sort of thing. So I got a lot of pushback from that episode. People felt, why would Pam go with Michael? Like, why would she? She's too smart for that. And they didn't understand that there was 2 love stories in The Office. One is Jim and Pam, the other one is Pam and Michael, right? They're not a different type of love, but sort of father-daughter type of relationship. And the progression of their relationship, I think, is one of the great themes of the whole series. And so
I think there's also an ambition arc there with Pam, where she comes in as she's a secretary, and you see her sort of progress. And I think that was a great thing about the Office, is that they showcased strong women in positions where they grew, where they weren't just stagnant in a lot of ways.
Yeah. In those days, we had a relatively diverse room in terms of men and women, and it was like 40% women. It's getting better now. I mean, we're seeing more inclusion, which is a good thing, of course. But I think that might be part of why, if we got those characters right, it probably helped that we had people in the room who could really have that voice.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the future of The Office, if there is one. When it ended in 2013, the last episode was called Finale, and that would lead one to believe that it's done. But there are rumors of a spinoff. There are rumors of a return of a 10th season. What can you tell us about that, Aaron?
Well, I'm probably not the first person they're calling if there's going to be a spinoff. I'm probably the 12th person. So you might know before I do. I'll have to tell my agent to try to get me back on The Office. I would bet, I think a spinoff is more likely, but definitely nothing coming anytime soon. Say that. I mean, right now we don't even know what's being shot at all. I just wrote co-wrote a episode of a Shonda Rhimes series for Netflix with Norman Lear, and we're waiting to see if and when, because of COVID, we'll be able to shoot that. But that was I was really happy to work with Norman Lear.
Last thing I want to ask, Aaron, before I give another plug for how you can make an impact this month. Aaron, what else are you watching right now, or what else are you listening to? What can you point us in the direction toward from an entertainment or interesting perspective?
I really like I said, Fleabag. If you haven't seen that, that's a show to watch. Patriot is a lot of fun, especially season 1. There's a show called Get Shorty based on the movie. I don't know where you can find it. It was on Epix, and it has Ray Romano in it. That I think it's you'll get point if you're looking for the good show that you can tell all your friends about that they haven't heard about. That's what that might get you some points. Get Shorty. The others are probably pretty obvious choices. I'm enjoying Ted Lasso. And it's interesting to see because it's a sort of a soft and pleasant show, which I think we all just are desperate for a break, and so it's such a, kind-hearted show, which is part of what I like about it. But a lot of people are talking about Ted Lasso. What else is sort of an obscure comedy worth? Shtisel, you got to see Shtisel if you haven't, and Unorthodox are also great shows.
Great shows, indeed. Well, this has been great, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for imparting your thoughts and your wisdom. on behalf of Jewish World Watch, we really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And I'll say also, if you guys do have more questions for Aaron, or if you feel like there's something else you wanted to ask but didn't get the chance today, he is on Twitter. Aaron, what's your Twitter handle?
Gosh, I think it's Aaron Schur. It's Mr. Schur. It's at Mr. Schur.
Mr. Schur.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with the other Mr. Schur.
Yeah, Michael Schur.
So follow him
Thank
there.
you
Ask
all.
some questions there. And Serena, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And thank you both so much. I think this was a really neat way, again, to sort of get to know the Jewish World Watch community. This has been a really incredible month so far. You've got to experience some of our work that we do in advocacy and in education and in outreach. And our work doesn't stop. So please go on our website, jww.org/impact. You can find out what more you can do in the weeks and months to come. Tomorrow night, there's a TAP game night. TAP is our Teen Ambassadors program. Sylvie is going to be hosting and facilitating. So this organization is it's all about family. It's all about community. We need you to go on, and we need you to support us so that we can continue to fight genocide and mass atrocity. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. And again, thank you to Aaron, and thank you to Jeremy. Have a
My
wonderful
pleasure. And if you're wondering if I always wear a white Henley, here's the proof.
you. Okay.
That's the brooding writer in you.
The rumor will now be put to bed.
Never not in a white Henley.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
Wear a mask.
Bye.